Hello everyone, I'm Alfian and today we are going to solve the Leetcode challenge on the easy category challenge called the longest common prefix. And for this particular challenge, we are tasked to write a function to find the longest common prefix string amongst an array of strings. If there is no common prefix, return an empty string. And for this case, we have we have an array of strings that contain every similar string, and then for this particular string we need to solve or find the common prefix between strings inside the array. And also for this example number 2, it's also the first prefix or the first word in an array is a dog, and for the second one is a race car. Of course, the dog and race car, they don't have any similarities between them, so it returns an empty string as the output. And we don't have to count the car because they both don't have any similarities between them, so we need to return it as early as possible to prevent the complex big O notation. And for this one, I'm using the TypeScript as for this challenge because I like using TypeScript. And for this parameter, if you haven't familiar with this kind of parameter, which is the string of array as the type of the strings right here, and then for this one, after the colon sign is the string, which is the output. We need to return some kind of string in order to make the function complete. If we don't return anything, then this string will have some kind of red underline beneath this type's output. And so without further ado, let's solve this. For this parameter return, we need to solve at some kind of, if we don't have any strings length, if we don't have any string inside the array, or just an empty array without any element of strings, then we can return an empty string. And then for another check, we can use some kind of string to be tested to another string. Let's say for the test case, we can use the very first string inside the array by using the let prefix to find the prefix value. Then we can use it later. That takes the first element of the string array, and then we can use some kind of for loop to iterate between the strings inside the array by using the for loop. Since we already defined the prefix variable, then we only have to using the let I and iterating from the start of the for loop by using the second element. And also for the example 2, we can use the second element because the first element we already declared it as the prefix to be tested for the next iteration. And as long as the I is below the strings array, that takes the length property, and then I++, and I will be incremented by 1. And for inside the for loop, we need some kind of comparator to compare between the string of the index of 0, which is the first element, with the second element of from the for loop. So we need to compare them. We need some kind of comparator to compare between string right here of the second element against the first element we already declared here with the prefix variable, and then compare them letter by letter, or just compare them as a whole string. And then for the next iteration, then we can compare this flight with the previous iteration, which is flow. And then for the previous iteration, then we need the result from both of these strings and then compare it against the new string. So let's solve this by using the while loop, and then check for the string array of the current iteration, and we can use some kind of like finding the string or the similarities between them by using the GS. Let's see the index of. Let's look over to the MTN documentation about the index of function, and in the index of is one of the functions inside the array instances. Since strings is also considered as an array of strings, like we can use like this. And then let's run this. If you haven't known it yet, the string is also considered an array. It's in JavaScript, it's considered an array of letters, so that's why it's in a form of a string. And for this index of, the expected output is 1 because on the previous one we defining the array of strings as the base. Since we already modified it inside the MTN documentation, then it's also in a form of array, and it returns 0 because the Python is also on the same as Python. So let's say if we modify it by adding an a, let's run this, and it's also returning 0. But if we reverse this value or this variable, and let's run this, and then the string is not compatible, which is returning 1 minus 1 as the result, because it didn't find any similarities between this base variable or the constant. Yeah, I'm just using this as the demonstration. So let's go back to the implementation. Like we need some kind of a code that can return like this. So let's say for the flower, and it's for the prefix that we declare above, and then for the second element of the string it's a flow. Then for this while loop we can use it like this, as this we can visualize it like this. Flower for the first, for the prefix, and then after the first while loop it will be flower with the e, and then for another loop it will be flow, and then this flow will equals to the second element of the string, and then the while loop will stop. And if it didn't find anything, it won't stop until the while loop finds the similarities between those strings or between those words. So let's say if we have some kind of, for this example number 2 is a dog, compares it with the race car, and then since dog is the first string, then the while loop will iterate like this, do, and then for the next iteration will d, and then for the final iteration, which is which is just an empty string, and then for the empty string if it's the empty string, then we don't have to while loop anything, and we return using the break to break from the while loop to stop the iteration, and then returning the empty string, and then we don't have to compare against the car because it's already incompatible from the start. Okay, so let's implement this by using while loop, for the current iteration, which is the second element, and then that takes the index of, and then for this parameter we can insert the prefix, so that way we compare the flow with the flower, and then check if it returns, if the index of returns the, if it's not the 0 like the one I demonstrated earlier on the MDN web docs, if it's -1, which is not 0, if they are compatible or they have some similarities, then we can return the rest of the, or the similarities of the prefix between them. If it's not, then we can continue the while loop. If it is, then we can mutate the prefix let variable with the new prefix, that we can use the slice function that takes the 0 as the first parameter, which is the first index. Let's say if we have flower and then the slice, then we can, then that way the slice will start from the F, and then using the -1 for the second parameter, it will insert the flower. Let me demonstrate it with the MDN docs GS1. Okay, let me change this using console.log. So log animals.slice, and then takes the first parameter as the 0, and then for the second parameter as the -1. Let's change this to, let's say we have flower, and then let's run this, and the while loop will return flowy, and then the -1 acts as a slicer for the last element of the string. Like I said earlier, that the string is also a form of array. On the other words, is an array of letters. So for the -1, acts, it takes the very last element of the array, since -1 is used if we don't know the length of the array. So we can pass the -1 as the second parameter, and then the -1 will cut the last string or the last letter of the strings right here. So that's why we are returning flower right there, like this. And so that's the summary of the while loop, and then we can continue looping on the while loop if we can check if the prefix is a falsy value, or empty string is also considered a falsy value with the exclamation mark in front of the variable. If it is, then we can return as the empty string. So if, let's say, if the slicing the while loop already hits the empty string, which is the falsy value, like here, so that's why we are using the if. And then if it's already an empty string, then we can return the empty string and stopping the while loop and the for loop at all. And then for the final part, let's say if the for loop finishes iterating every string inside the array, then we can, don't forget to return the prefix. So let's run this to see if it works by using the control apostrophe. Okay, so the input already passed for the example 1, and then the FL is returned, because on all of them the similar prefixes are FL, so that is why it's returning FL. Yeah, let's submit this. to see if it works. Okay, for the runtime, it's the most effective. It's 100%. Yeah, and most people already beats the 100% mark. And for the memory aspect, yeah, so that's about it. I hope you understand my explanation. If you haven't understand, you can ask in the comment section. If you have any better solutions, you can also write in the comment section. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.